Hey, how did application weekend go?
It went really well. We had about 22 families, a lot from the New England area, but also 2 families from California, and I even Skyped some international students. So many families were here that we ran out of all the cider donuts.
That's fantastic. And hey,
Live
from
from
Hampshire College.
It's Tuesday night!
Woo! Hi everyone. So we wanted to take some time tonight to talk about the early action application deadline that's coming up a week from today, Tuesday, December 1st. My name is Louisa. This is Christina. My name is Louisa, and I am the Assistant Director of Admissions here at Hampshire. I work with students from New Jersey down to North Carolina, reading applications, traveling to high schools, and going to college fairs.
And like Louisa said, I'm Christina. I work with students from Rhode Island, Kentucky, South Carolina, South Dakota, and all international students, as well as U.S. students studying abroad.
Great.
So thanks for joining us tonight. So the early action deadline is approaching in December 1st. We hope you're not too stressed out about that. Enjoy your holiday break that's upon us. But we just have a lot of frequently asked questions that we've kind of gathered throughout our years in admissions. And so we're just kind of start talking about them and discuss them from our viewpoint as the admissions applications. Because yes, your applications are getting read by real people.
Yeah, and so before we go into our specific questions that we've gathered, we wanted to just give a general overview of what early action means at Hampshire. I think it's first important to know that it's not a binding application deadline, and so you can apply to Hampshire and other colleges for early action, unlike the early decision deadline that we offered in November. The deadline, again, is Tuesday, December 1st. The real sort of benefit is what we'll talk about through the conversation, but it's really just an opportunity for students who have their application together a little bit earlier to also hear from Hampshire a few months earlier as well. So what's our first question?
Our first question is regarding the writing pieces of the application at Hampshire. As you know, the Common App essay question for the Common App, is it required for Hampshire?
That's a great question. So this year it actually isn't required. So you're still welcome to send it along with your Common App if it's something that you do feel represents who you are as a student and an applicant, but you're also welcome to choose not to send it in. That's an option that the Common Application site will give you.
Exactly, because you all work hard on those applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question that we get a lot is in regards to the academic paper that we require as part of our Hampshire-specific supplement. And people are always interested to know sort of what we're really looking for with that academic paper, and whether it has to be something that was graded or commented on by a teacher sort of in that draft format. What do you think about that, Christina?
So what we're really looking for with your academic paper is that it shows an academic idea, a thesis with supporting documentation. That's the general kind of essence of it. We like to see about anywhere from 3 to no more than 10 pages. Keep in mind that, you know, we are reading, and yes, we do read everything, but 10 pages I think is plenty to show with your academic writing capabilities. Also, sometimes students ask about getting like a teacher's graded copy about that. If you can have that, that's great, but it's not required at all. What have been some topics with the academic paper that you've seen in the past, Louisa?
Oh, sure. I think we tend to see a lot of papers that were written for English or history courses. So perhaps you've read some piece of literature and your teacher asks you to develop a thesis in response to that piece of literature, supported by sort of textual citations from the book and that sort of thing. We do see papers from science courses as well, but I'd say that humanities papers are more common in terms of what we get. Yeah.
And I've also seen a lot of argumentative papers as well, kind of choosing sides. I've seen that in the past.
Yeah, definitely. And if you have any specific questions about a paper you're thinking about using, you're not sure it's appropriate, you're always welcome to get in touch with your admissions counselor for your area of the country or the world if that's useful to you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then let's talk a little bit about the supplemental essays that Hampshire requires. How long should those be? And by supplemental essays, I'm talking about the hypothetical research project essay question as well as the self-evaluation.
Yeah.
How long should those be?
Yeah, so we suggest about 300 words for each of those. Some students will do a little more, a little less, but that seems to be an appropriate amount for each of those essays. let's talk a little bit more about sort of what those essays actually mean and how they're useful to us. So do you want to start by talking about the hypothetical research project?
Definitely, I'd love to take that. So this is one of the essays that talks about taking, 3 different areas of study and combining it into one hypothetical project. This is reflective off of our Division 3 project here at Hampshire, and so we've gotten a lot of different interesting essay questions with that. We're looking at to kind of see what kind of areas you're interested in to kind of confirm and consolidate what it is you're interested in, so we can maybe link you up with the appropriate department heads, but also kind of get excited about what you're excited about studying and starting to think about those questions as you begin your Hampshire experience, because that does start at, the first time that you come into Hampshire. So the more that we know about that, and it doesn't have to be definitive, whatever you write, we're not going to hold you to it and say, hey, 4 years ago you wrote about this hypothetical research. Shouldn't you be doing that right now? You're in your Div 3. We're not going to be like that, but it just gives us a nice sense of idea of what you're interested in.
Great, yeah. And then in terms of the self-evaluation, as you may or may not know, here at Hampshire, we use narrative evaluations instead of number or letter grades in classes. So professors give written feedback to their students in response to papers, projects they've done at the end of each course as well. And before students get that narrative evaluation from their professor in a Hampshire course, they actually write a self-evaluation of their performance in that course or learning activity. And so in your application, we find it really helpful to see how you can be reflective, sort of introspective about your own learning processes, decisions you've made academically, and how those have sort of been fulfilled through different classes you've taken in high school. And so it's really an opportunity for you to think back about a class you've done, a learning activity you've done, how that went, and sort of be reflective about your own learning processes in that way.
Great, thanks, Louisa.
Yeah. So should we move on to thinking a little bit and talking a little bit about letters of recommendation?
I think that's a great idea, because right now I know a lot of the high school counselors out there are busy writing recommendation letters. As that deadline is crunching, you might be getting emails from us out there. We don't want to stress anybody out. We want to make sure that, you're getting things in a timely manner. But Louisa, how many recommendations do we need to send, and from whom?
Yeah, great question. So we ask for 1 letter of recommendation from a guidance counselor and 1 letter of recommendation from a teacher. And that should be a teacher in an academic subject, so typically history, English, math, or science, typically not an art teacher or a language teacher, that sort of thing. And so that's something that you can just ask them for. Hopefully you've asked them for that already. And so for most students, we're just getting those 2 letters of recommendation. We do tend to get the question of whether people can send more than 2, 3, or even 4 letters of recommendation. What are your thoughts on that?
I say around 3, no more than 4. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and why?
Me personally, I feel that we get a lot from the recommendation letter, but 3 is a good number, no more than 4, unless you find that maybe the 4th has been through an organization you volunteered with that might show some type of skill that we might not have seen throughout your application, whether it's in a class or whether it's in an additional piece or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes a student will want to send an additional letter from a coach or a mentor or an employer, and that 1 additional is fine, but we try not to do much more than that. In terms of homeschooled students, that's something that comes up a lot. Typically for students who have been homeschooled or unschooled, the guidance counselor letter of recommendation comes from the parent, guardian, the adult who's been most involved in sort of your academic experience during your high school years, and we're certainly open to answering questions about who's most appropriate for that if you're interested in having that conversation.
Exactly. And I'll add to that with the recommendations. Occasionally I've had students contact me saying that it was really difficult to get a teacher or a counselor rec depending on certain circumstances. And if that's the case, just feel free to reach out to your counselor to kind of do a case-by-case basis in regards to the recommendation letters and requirements for that and from whom.
Yeah. Also, after you submit your application, we do send out an invitation for your parent, guardian to write a letter of recommendation on your behalf as well. And so if that's something that an adult in your life is interested in doing, they will be invited to do that after we receive your application. So that's something to look out for too. In terms of how to submit letters of recommendation, that is a process that occurs right through the Common Application. If you're having trouble with that, or your recommenders are having trouble with that, they're welcome to send their letters directly to application@hampshire.edu, and those will be put into your application file as well.
And also, if you will be sending to application@hampshire.edu, it's important to put your name and in the subject line so we can properly identify you, as well as your date of birth, because sometimes there's a couple more different last names. You might not be the only John Smith out there.
Exactly. Great. So how about moving on to sort of more general application questions, starting with the question of supplemental materials. That's something we find ourselves talking about a lot. And we love to see supplemental materials, examples of lab reports you've done, projects you've worked on, art you've created, poetry. Those are all things that we love to see. But we get a lot of questions about sort of how to submit those materials. So how is that working for the early action deadline?
You can submit that right through the Common App on the art or media upload file, or you can also upload it personally on your application page. Once you submit your application to Hampshire, you'll then get a login, which you can see your missing items, which is great. That's new for us this year, where you can actually have a digital portfolio and you can actually upload whatever it is you want to in there. If that's not working, or if you're kind of unfamiliar with that, as a last resort, again, application@hampshire.edu, you can submit through that, or directly to your particular counselor. And on the occasion with creative supplements, students have wanted to really send, perhaps they've wrote a book, or maybe they have a children's book that they've published, or a little piece of art portfolio, and they really feel that they want to mail it. Well, you're welcome to mail it. Just keep in mind that we won't be returning any of your material. So then your counsel will actually have that as an actual piece to look at.
Yeah, as well. You can mail it to us right here in Amherst at 893 West Street in Amherst, Massachusetts, zip code 01002. So going off of that, I think we've covered about if you're not able to upload anything in the Common App, you can always email application@hampshire.edu. What about mid-year reports as part of the submission process? I know oftentimes you'll see mid-year report and it's missing. What if I can't get those until February? What should I do? Sure, yeah. So for a lot of students, most schools, the mid-year has not actually passed yet. And so we completely understand that you do not yet have your mid-year report. Different schools will release those at different times, really anywhere from December to February usually. And so your application is still complete without that mid-year report. We'll make sure that your school sends it along whenever it's ready, and we'll get that directly from your guidance office. So don't worry too much about that. It will not make your application late. But it is important for us to see those grades halfway through the year once they've come in and once they've been sent to us. Speaking of grades, speaking of numbers, some of you may have heard that about a year ago we decided to go test blind. Do you want to explain what that policy means?
Yeah, so you might have heard test optional versus test blind. Right now, I believe we are the only accredited university in the United States who considers themselves test blind, meaning we are blind, do not look at your application, the test scores as a part of your admissions or financial aid. And so we've always been test optional as an institution since we've opened our doors in 1970. So this is pretty big news. We're very excited about it. We've gotten some recent publicity, you may have noticed. But we will not look at your test scores at all. Even if you accidentally send them, they will be blocked out before the admission counselors can even read them. So we really are not looking at your test scores at all. So when we take away our test scores, Louisa, what do we look at with the application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So hopefully you can already tell a little bit from our conversation tonight that there are a lot of other parts of your application that are really useful to us in terms of getting to know you as an applicant, as a student, and as a person. And what we found when we were really analyzing our student body who was thriving most at Hampshire was that the test scores they sent in, SAT and ACT scores, when they applied to Hampshire, were not predictive of success at Hampshire. So what was much more useful to us were the high school transcripts, the writing, the letters of recommendation, the interviews we did, really getting that more sort of subjective information within a student's context in high school and their years before Hampshire. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at your high school transcript, we're looking at your writing, we're looking at your letters of recommendation, your extracurricular involvements, and we love to interview students as well, which we'll talk about a little more later down in the conversation. And so if your SAT or ACT scores are accidentally sent to the office, don't worry, they will be blocked out before they get to our desk and for us to read them. So we will not be able to view those as part of your application, which is something we're really excited about.
Definitely, I can agree. I know you mentioned earlier about the transcript, and it kind of brought up a question to me, in regards to the numbers. Do we look at an overall GPA?
Good question. So we're much less concerned with your GPA than we are really with your grades in the context of your high school and really in the context of what classes you've chosen to take. So what that means is that we're not going to hold it against you if your school doesn't offer APs. We don't expect you to have taken 10 AP courses if they haven't been available to you. And so with every application, we get something called a school profile that really talks about maybe the size of the school, what sort of a high school it is that you go to, and what types of courses are offered. And so we're really able to read, to look at your transcript within that specific context. So that's much more important to us than sort of the GPA itself.
Exactly.
As I like to say, a 3.5 at one high school can mean something really different than a 3.5 at another high school. And we're lucky enough to have the time to really look at those applications with that greater context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also by not having this overall GPA kind of cutoff number that we look at, and going back to the story that your application tells, there are oftentimes that transition into high school can be a little rocky. Things can happen, and if things do happen, we like to see how, in those earlier years, you've overcome a lot of those challenges that you might have faced in life. And that's kind of how we look at, maybe you had a rockier grade earlier in your freshman or sophomore year. How did you seek out the help that you needed? How did you overcome your challenges? And how did you kind of rise above and come out on the top for those last 2 years?
Yeah, so we're really excited to see sort of upward trends in grades and that sort of thing as well. And in terms of grades, of course, there are some high schools also that don't use grades, that use narrative evaluations. And I hope it's obvious to say that we are happy to look at those transcripts as well. So that's not something that you have to worry about in terms of applying to Hampshire. I guess I'll just talk briefly about homeschooled students as well and sort of what the transcript looks like. We ask homeschooled students, unschooled students to really put together a transcript of what they've been doing in their high school years in terms of different learning activities that they've been engaged with. We get things like reading lists. We get lists of different maybe online courses or co-op courses that students have been engaged with. And so I think we'd both definitely encourage you to reach out to your admissions counselor if you are homeschooled or unschooled to make sure you're on the right track with putting that transcript together. And we don't require grades on a homeschool transcript either. So if that's something you choose not to do, that's perfectly fine with us.
Exactly. Thanks, Louisa. That was a good touch with the homeschooled applicants.
Sure, no problem.
Why don't we move on to a really fun part that I like about the application process?
What's that?
Personally, I really like it, is the interview.
Yes,
I love it.
A good part.
I love people. I love talking to people. That's my favorite piece.
It's a good thing you're in this industry then.
It is a really good thing.
Yeah.
So let's start with just the basic question. Does the student have to interview?
Good question. Interviews are not mandatory for an application to Hampshire College. They are highly recommended. They are not required. So that's kind of our policy on that. My question in terms of interviews is whether our interviews are evaluative, are they informational? Really, how is that interview used in our application process?
I would say sometimes I find this word interview maybe it's a little too intimidating for some people. We like to use our interview as a conversation, a two-way street. We want to know about you, It's a chance for you to kind of share things that are important to you, for us to get to know you as a person outside of the paper. But it's also a really great time for you to get to know a little bit about Hampshire and how your specific interests and your specific personality can mesh really well with us, I would say.
So perhaps it's both informational and evaluative.
It is.
Great, wonderful.
Let's see, how about doing the interview after the application?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we do ask that all interviews are completed on or before the application deadline. So for early action, that is next Tuesday, December 1st. For regular decision, which is a little later in the year, that will be January 15th. You're always welcome to come in and have a conversation with your counselor with a current student, but after the application deadline, those will not be considered actually as part of the application, so they're no longer evaluative. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Louisa.
Sure. My next question is perhaps a prospective student is wondering if they interviewed with a current student at Hampshire as opposed to with an admissions counselor. Is that okay? Does that count? Is that an official interview as part of the application process?
So one thing that I find really unique about Hampshire is that students are involved in pretty much everything as far as policy goes, hiring new staff, new faculty. There's always a student part of the interview in the search process. And with that, as you're all applying to Hampshire, we have trained Division III students who will interview you, and it is a real interview, and we will use that as the application process.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's okay.
Yes, so the Division III fourth-year students at Hampshire are trained just like the admissions counselors to have interviews with prospective students, and often it really gives an interesting perspective to talk with that student about their journey to Hampshire, about how their experience at the college is going. And I didn't mention, but I am an alum, and I actually had my interview a few years ago with a fourth-year Division III student. So it turns out that it works out pretty well with that too.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes, because students can give you a perspective that I, as a non-alum, might not be able to give you. But I would still love to interview you.
Yeah. And so you work with students who are often living pretty far away from Hampshire.
This is correct.
And so we get the question a lot, if you can't make it to campus to interview, very valid question, what do? You want to have an interview, you want to have that conversation with a representative of Hampshire. Do we have options for those students?
We definitely have options. One of those I would suggest is going to the website to see if we're doing any area interviews in your area. If we're not, because for me specifically, the world is a very large place, but with the help of technology, we can do Skype interviews, phone interviews. I'm even open to doing a FaceTime interview if Skype is a problem for you, but let's stick with Skype. To set up a Skype or phone interview, all you have to do is contact our office, specifically your regional counselor, and they'll be happy to set up a Skype interview. We try to do it during the Monday through Friday business hours. Occasionally, we're able to do a weekend depending on the counselor's availability. We also might have a Skype interview with a student, and that's okay as well. If you want to do a weekend, we might be able to get a student to do that.
Great. So any other interview-related questions, or should we move on?
I think we should move on.
All right, what's next?
The next has to do with a little bit of just like the application miscellaneous kind of questions in regards to that.
Miscellaneous.
And the first one has to do with our application fee.
Ooh.
So we have a question. It's like, do you waive the application fee?
Excellent question. We don't have an application fee,
Yay.
so that isn't something that students have to worry about.
It's free to apply.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Next question, why don't you have an application fee?
Ooh, even better question. So we do think it's really important that students really put something of themselves into each application for each college that they're applying to, but I don't necessarily think that needs to be $65. So it can be your time, your thoughts, your energy, a little bit of your history and the things that you're interested in are all things that we do ask for on the application. We talked before about the writing supplement and how that's pretty substantial. So that's something that we're really interested in getting from students. But we think you can show your interest and your commitment to Hampshire through that as opposed to any sort of application fee to apply. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Great.
Thanks for breaking the barriers down.
Sure. So I sort of alluded to this before, but are there advantages to applying early action versus regular decision. Just a reminder, early action is December 1st, non-binding, versus regular decision, which is January 15th, non-binding as well. So what's the difference? Why would a student apply early action?
So that's a great question. I don't know about you, Louisa, but I like to get things done early, so I don't have to stress out about it, especially my senior year. So really, the benefit to knowing, to applying early would be you find out a little earlier than.
When do you find out?
You find out February 15th. So February 15th would be the early action notification deadline, as opposed to
April 1st,
which
is the regular decision. And for most colleges across the country, the decision date, the date when you have to submit your deposit, is May 1st of 2016 this year. And so a lot of students find it helpful to have those few extra months maybe to visit, to weigh the pros and cons of their financial aid package, that sort of thing, before they have to make that big decision about where they'd like to go to college.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's good you mentioned the word visit, because I personally think if you are willing and able, the visit is a very, very crucial piece. If you're admitted to Hampshire or any of your other schools on your list, go visit, sit in on a class, meet a professor, talk to students, eat the food, check out the area. It's not about academics, but it's also about your life too, and 4 years of it, may I add.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in the spring as well, we have overnight hosting for admitted students. And so that's an option if you're coming from further away and want to actually spend the night, or if you're coming from close by, that's fine too. So yeah, the visit is an important part of the experience.
Great. But let's get back to the application.
Yeah, so another sort of miscellaneous question that we've been getting a lot lately is saying, you know, I got an email saying you haven't gotten my application yet, but I'm pretty sure that I sent it in. What's going on with that? What's going on with the Common Application website?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when you're fine-tuning through all those essays, you want to make sure it's perfect. Check it once, check it twice, 3 times. The most important thing to do is to click submit. So simple answer, re-log into the Common App, check it one more time, and then hit submit.
And at the same time, sometimes there are problems on our end, so we're not saying it's necessarily your fault. We're always happy to check in our system and make sure there isn't something that we've missed on that end of the application.
Because we also know that sometimes there can be technical difficulties, and the computers might have a little technical difficulty there too.
Yeah, so a really important part of applying to a college, applying to private colleges, is of course paying for the college tuition, financial aid. Those are things that we talk about a lot here at Hampshire. And so the first and simplest question that we thought we'd address is, how does a student apply for financial aid? How do I apply to get need-based financial aid at Hampshire College? What's the answer to that question?
It's a great question. I have a 2-part answer. First, submit the CSS profile on the College Board website. Make sure you submit it for the 2016-2017 academic year, for the fall that's upcoming, because right now you might see the 2015-2016, but that's actually for the spring. So click on the next year. That is due at the time of application. So if it's early decision, December 1st. You actually don't send that to us. That actually gets sent to our financial aid office. You can always contact them. You can look at our website. You can just Google Hampshire Financial Aid. But you can also email them at financialaid@hampshire.edu.
Yeah, and of course, if there's an admissions counselor you've been talking with, you're more comfortable sort of contacting us first. We're also happy to serve as a liaison between students and the financial aid office.
Definitely.
Just to put a point on that.
We're here for you, basically. That's what we're saying. But also the second part to the financial aid piece. So the CSS goes with your application at that deadline. But then there's also the FAFSA. I'm sure you might have heard, you know, with your college counselors, talking to mom, dad, parents, uncles, aunts, other friends.
The free application for student aid.
Exactly.
FAFSA.
Exactly. So that is actually federal money that is allocated to different schools. And so you can apply for that through Stafford loans, maybe some grants here and there. But that, you can't really officially fill it out until January 1st.
Right, and it's due on March 1st of 2016. So how many students at Hampshire get financial aid? You have 1,400 students. What percentage of them are actually not paying the sticker price of $64,000 a year?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And we have an answer, 85%.
Right, wonderful. So we were talking before about need-based money that is sort of allotted through the FAFSA, through the profile. Does Hampshire give out merit scholarships as well? Is there any of that money available?
We do. That's a great question. You work really hard academically, and we would like to reward you for that as well. What I will say that as we've kind of looked at our admissions process, taking rid of the SAT, ACT, what we've done is Hampshire is still a young institution, and so we've allocated the limited financial aid funding that we do have to financial aid. And so what we did was we kind of lowered our merit cap based on your academics, the strength of your academics, as well as additional outlying factors, you know, things that you may have been involved with, perhaps the writing, creativity, but most of that's based on your academics itself. We do have different scholarships in different areas of interest, and that will cap at $10,000 in merit money. And you don't have to do anything for that. All you have to do is apply. So we have an writing scholarship.
The Inkwell Award.
Inkwell, the Emerging Scientist Award for all the scientists out there, an Innovators Award.
The Humanitas Award, Arts in Action. Yeah, and so all of those scholarship awards, that scholarship money is awarded just by the admissions office based on your application. Again, not just on your GPA, but really on your academics and some of your extracurriculars holistically as well. And that if you get one of those scholarships, you will receive that notification with your acceptance letter to Hampshire as well. Same with the financial aid awards. As long as you get your materials in on time, you will hear about your financial aid award when you get your letter from us. So you'll be able to really think about that and make that decision right when you get that information. So I guess a final financial aid question that I know is near and dear to your heart. Do we at Hampshire give financial aid to international students who are not citizens of the United States?
That's a great question. Thanks, Louisa.
Sure.
We do give financial aid to international students. And an international student is defined as a non-U.S. citizen, which does also include self-identified undocumented students living here in the U.S. as well. You will get packaged as an international student. We use the CSS profile. International students don't need to worry about the FAFSA. And then basically you fill out the CSS profile. We can grant about 25% to 75% towards tuition. And that includes your merit and need-based packages. So although we don't provide full ride scholarships, we do give aid, and we're one of the few schools in the nation that actually does.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
So one last question for you. Any words of wisdom for students who are working on their applications right now, or how can students be spending their final year of high school preparing for their journey in college?
That's a great question. In case you haven't heard that, because we had a live question from one of our behind-the-scenes admissions people, the original Christina. She asked, are there any last-minute words of wisdom that we can give you as you're finalizing the application process, and also things that you can be doing your final year of high school in order to prepare for college?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess a really basic thought that I'd like to share, and something that we think a lot about in college admissions and here at Hampshire specifically, is really thinking about what school is going to be right for you. And so what I encourage students to do, and what I often ask students is, you know, we at colleges and admissions offices have all of these requirements, things we're asking of students. And I'd encourage you to think of colleges in the same way. So what are some of the requirements that you have for a college that you're interested in going to? Do they have to have a soccer team? Do they have to have a climbing wall? Do they have to have a program that in sort of theoretical physics? Do they have to have a kiln on campus? You know, there are about 2,000 or 4,000 colleges in the United States right now. There are a whole
4,400.
Okay, So there are a lot of colleges and universities in the United States, many of which would be really excited to have you as a student. And so I encourage you to really think about yourself as an individual, both as a student and as a person, and think about what types of learning environments, academic environments, social environments are going to be best for you. And a lot of the times visiting really helps that. But we know that it's hard to visit schools that are far away. So one piece of advice that I also like to give is visit schools that are nearby to you. No matter where you live, there are going to be at least a couple colleges nearby. Just by getting on those campuses, you can get a sense of what you like, what you don't like, visit a class, see what type of classroom environment works best for you. And that's a much more sort of low cost and accessible way to visit schools, even if they're not necessarily schools you think you're going to be interested in.
I would definitely second that motion, and I would also add, be yourself, be authentic, because that only validates what Louisa said. It's really all about you and what you're looking for and where you're going to be comfortable. So really take that time, enjoy your senior year, try to make the most of it. I can encourage you to continue following your passions, finish strong, don't let those grades drop that last semester. We do look at that in admissions. So yeah, carry on. You can do it.
Yes, and good luck.
And good luck.
Thanks for talking with us
Thanks.
for a little while.
Feel free to contact us with any more questions. We reported live on a Tuesday night.
From Amherst, Massachusetts.
C-Riz signing out.